There's a sacred strength in silence, not the kind that keeps us small or silenced, but the kind that holds space, that listens, that understands the weight of a moment before rushing in with noise. Today, I want to talk about 7 moments, 7 powerful moments when choosing silence is not weakness, but wisdom. And I'm not talking about shutting down. I'm talking about pausing with purpose. Holding your breath so you don't break the soul of something beautiful or fragile. Or still becoming. You see, silence is a boundary. It's a form of bravery. And in these 7 situations, it's not just a good idea. It's a sacred decision. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every battle is yours to fight. Sometimes being silent is the loudest, boldest, most self-respecting thing you can do. It's the self-respecting thing you can do. Anger is one of the most honest emotions we have. It shows up uninvited and unfiltered. It doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door open. And when it hits, it feels righteous. It feels righteous. It feels sharp. It makes our chest tighten and our hands shake. And it tells us one thing. Me. Say something. Defend yourself. Set the record straight. Win. But the truth is, when we're in the grip of that heat, that swelling storm in our chest, the words that come out aren't truth. They're fire. And fire doesn't build bridges, burns them down. There's a very human urge to speak when we're angry. To let people know how much they've hurt us. To control the situation. To make the discomfort stop. But here's what I've learned. What research shows and what life confirms again and again. When anger is peaking, clarity is hiding. And if you can't find clarity, don't reach for words. Because when our emotions outrun our values, we say things we don't mean. Or worse, we say things we do mean, but in ways that break trust instead of building understanding. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying don't feel angry. Feel it. Feel all of it. Anger is a signal. It's the check engine light of our emotional dashboard. It's letting us know something's off, something matters deeply. But there's a difference between responding to that signal and reacting to it. Silence and anger isn't stuffing it down. It's sitting with it long enough to know where it's coming from and what it's really trying to say. Anger is never just anger. Underneath, there's usually fear, grief, shame, or the pain of not being seen. There have been times in my own life when I've reacted in anger and the words flew out like darts. And you know what? It felt good for about 3 seconds. 3 seconds of I showed them. But what came after was regret. Regret that I didn't wait. Regret that I didn't lead with my values. Regret that I let the pain speak louder than the person I want to be. Because here's the deal, silence isn't weakness. It's not passivity. It's not losing the fight. Silence, in these moments, is restraint. And restraint is strength. And restraint is strength. Silence gives us time. Time to cool down. Time to gather facts instead of assumptions. Time to consider not just what we want to say, but what actually needs to be said. Because words spoken in anger are like arrows. You can't take them back. And even if you apologize, even if you didn't mean them, they land, they stick. And sometimes they wound in ways we don't even see. Silence gives space. And space allows room for clarity to rise to the surface. Real clarity, not reactive defense. I've worked with leaders, parents, couples, teachers, people in every imaginable walk of life. And the truth is, universal. No one ever regrets the pause, the silence, the moment of breath before the reaction. That pause, it's a sacred moment of choice, a microsecond of power where you get to decide who you're going to be. Will I be someone who reacts from pain or someone who responds from integrity? And often that choice starts with silence. Silence. So when the anger rushes in, when your voice trembles, when your pulse pounds, when everything in you wants to say something, don't. Not yet. Walk away. Breathe. Breathe. Cry if you need to. Scream into a pillow. Write it out in a journal. Do whatever you need to do to honor the emotion without dishonoring yourself or the people around you, because silence in those moments isn't about withholding. It's about protecting. protecting your integrity. Protecting your relationships. Protecting the truth underneath the pain. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It's not a wound you can stitch closed with the right words. When someone is grieving, they're standing in the middle of a storm. And that storm isn't asking for advice. And that storm isn't asking for advice. It's asking for presence. It's asking for stillness. But so many of us, because we love, because we care, because we hate to see people hurting, we rush in with words. We say things like, everything happens for a reason, or they're in a better place, or at least you had time with them. These are meant to comfort, but they don't. What they do, often without us realizing, is make the grieving person feel like they need to make us feel better. When someone is grieving, what they need most is permission to not be okay. Not just permission. They need company. Quiet, compassionate company that doesn't try to fix it or frame it or make sense of it. The truth is, grief is senseless. It's messy and raw and personal. It doesn't move in a straight line, and it doesn't follow polite timelines. And when we try to use words to box it up and tie it with a bow, we're not helping, we're avoiding. We're avoiding the discomfort of not knowing what to say. But here's the truth. There's no magic sentence that will make grief less painful. What helps isn't what you say. It's how you stay. It's how you stay. I've sat with people in the deepest valleys of loss of a child, a parent, a partner, a dream, and every single time I'm reminded presence is more powerful than platitudes. Just being there, just holding their hand, just sitting beside them in silence. That's what stays with people. Not the perfect condolence card, not the right quote, but the moment someone chose to just be with them wordlessly when the world felt like it was falling apart. That moment, that's love in its purest form. We live in a culture that's deeply uncomfortable with silence. We rush to fill it. We rush to fill it. We confuse talking with connecting. But silence is not empty. It's full of weight, full of meaning, full of permission. When you sit in silence with someone who's grieving, you are saying, I see your pain, and I won't turn away from it. I don't need to rush you past it. I'm not afraid of your sadness. That kind of silent presence builds more trust than 100 comforting phrases ever could. It's a kind of love that doesn't flinch. Sometimes we think we have to do something grand to show support. But honestly, it's the simplest things. Sitting quietly next to someone. Making them a cup of tea without asking. Being willing to hear the same story again and again without trying to redirect or reframe. These are the things that heal because they say, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to push you through. I'm just here, and I'm not There's a line I often return to. The silence between two people can hold more love than the words ever could, and it's especially true in grief. We speak too soon, we risk making the pain about us. When we jump in with advice or solutions, we're often managing our own discomfort, not theirs. But when we stay quiet, when we breathe and just allow the space, we make room for their sorrow, for their story, for their experience just as it is. And that, right there, is sacred ground. You don't need the right words to be the right person. You don't need to speak to show love. You just need to stay. Let the silence be your solidarity. Let your presence be your compassion. Grief doesn't need fixing. It needs honoring. And sometimes the most powerful way to honor it is to sit in the silence beside it and say, without a single word, doubt, a single word, I'm with you. There is a kind of quiet courage in admitting you don't know something. In a world where opinions are currency and being a right is worn like armor, it can feel vulnerable, even risky, to stay silent when conversations eat up. But here's the truth. Silence, when you're not informed, isn't passivity. It's integrity. It takes more strength to say, well, I don't know enough to speak on this, than it does to fake confidence or parrot what you heard someone else say. Because silence, in this case, isn't a lack of participation. It's an act of respect. We live in a culture of instant reaction. Tweets fly, comments erupt, news breaks, and people feel like they need to have a take within minutes. But thoughtful responses take time. They take curiosity. So much. Take time. They take listening. And when we speak without truly understanding, we're not contributing to clarity. We're contributing to noise. We choose silence instead. We create space for listening, for learning, for someone more informed to speak. And that space is sacred. Sacred. That space can shift everything. It's tempting to fill the silence with something, anything, so we're not left out of the conversation. We fear that if we don't speak, we'll be invisible, be irrelevant. But I've found that the most respected voices are the ones who know when to pause, who know when to say, I want to understand more before I weigh in. That kind of silence shows humility. It shows intention. And intention is the foundation of credibility. It says, I care about the truth more than I care about being seen as the smartest person in the room. I've had moments, especially as a researcher and a public speaker, where I've been asked questions I didn't have the answer to. And let me tell you, the first instinct is always to fill the space, to reach for something smart, to avoid that dreaded feeling of not knowing. But I've learned to trust the pause, to say, that's a great question, and I don't want to speak from assumption. Every time I've done that, the respect in the room has gone up, not down. People don't expect us to know everything. What they do expect is honesty. When we speak before we've listened, we run the risk of centering ourselves instead of the issue. And that's especially true in conversations about identity, justice, trauma, spaces where lived experience matters more than opinion. In those moments, silence is solidarity. It's stepping back so someone else can step forward. It's choosing to learn rather than lead. And that choice, that's what builds trust. That's what makes people feel safe, because no one wants to be talked over, especially by someone who doesn't fully understand what they're talking about. Faugi and to reconcile. One of the most powerful things you can say in a conversation is, tell me more. Not, that here's what I think. Not, oh, well, in my experience, but simply help me understand. That's not silence out of fear. That's silence born of deep curiosity. And that's where connection lives. When we listen to learn, not to reply, we open ourselves to growth. We don't lose credibility. We earn it because the people around us can feel the difference between someone who's truly listening and someone who's just waiting for their turn to speak. So the next time you're in a room or a conversation or a comment thread and you feel the urge to weigh in, ask yourself, do I really understand this? Do I know enough to speak from a place of truth? Not just opinion. And if the answer is no, pause, breathe. Choose silence. Not as a retreat, but as a responsibility. Because the loudest voice isn't always the wisest. Sometimes the most powerful contribution you can make is the one where you don't speak, but you listen like it matters. Because it does. It does. There's a line we all walk in our relationships between honesty and harm, between truth-telling and tearing someone down. Sometimes we disguise our criticism as it just being real or telling it like it is, when, in truth, we're using honesty when say as a weapon. But here's the thing, truth without compassion isn't brave, it's brutality. And in the moments when your words, however true they may be, have the power to humiliate another person, silence becomes an act of integrity. We live in a world where calling people out is celebrated more than calling people in. We see viral clips of public takedowns and think, yes, they deserved that. But here's what I've learned. Shaming someone may feel powerful in the moment, but it does nothing to create lasting change. And change. If your goal is to help someone grow, humiliation is not the path. It might win you a moment of superiority, but it costs you trust, and it often wounds more deeply than you realize. Silence, in those moments, gives you the pause to choose love over ego. I said choose love over ego. There have been times in my own life when I've wanted to say something sharp because I was hurt, because I was frustrated, because I felt disrespected. And I'll be honest, the words formed fast. Perfect comebacks, snappy retorts, the kind of thing that sting and sticks. But just because I can say it doesn't mean I should. When we humiliate someone, even with truth on our side, we abandon empathy. And without empathy, truth becomes cold. It becomes a tool for dominance, not connection. It takes emotional maturity to hold your tongue when you know you're right. To pause and ask, is this necessary? Is this kind? Will this bring us closer, or will it build a wall? The ego wants the last word. A soul wants peace. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose silence, not because you're scared to speak, but because you're strong enough not to wound. Not to wound. You don't have to crush someone to make a point. You don't have to humiliate someone to prove yours. Let's not confuse silence with surrender. This kind of silence is not about avoiding confrontation or staying small. It's about knowing that some truths are better delivered in privacy, with softness, and with timing. It's the difference between pulling someone aside to help them grow and calling them out in front of others to make them shrink. Humiliation is never a tool of wholehearted leadership, parenting, partnership, or friendship. In fact, the moment we humiliate, we trade power with someone for power over them. I've worked with leaders who thought shaming employees would motivate them. I've counseled parents who believed harsh words would toughen up their children. And every time, the result was the same: disconnection, fear, resentment. If you really want someone to change, if you really want to create an opening for growth, you start with respect. And that means knowing when to hold back words that would hurt more than heal. That means choosing silence in the heat of the moment so you can return with a voice that uplifts, even when it's delivering hard truth. Choose. So when your heart starts racing and your tongue feels like it's ready to strike, pause. Not forever, not to suppress your truth, but to protect the sacredness of the moment, to check your intention, to remember that being right is never more important than being kind. Because in the end, what we say matters, but how we say it matters even more. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can say is nothing at all, until love is ready to speak. Being provoked is one of the most difficult emotional spaces to navigate because everything in us wants to react. When someone pushes our buttons, disrespects us, mocks us, or questions our character, it strikes a nerve so deep that the urge to defend, attack, or retaliate feels almost instinctual. But here's what I've learned from years of studying emotion, shame, and resilience. Just because you're provoked doesn't mean you have to perform. You don't owe anyone a response that sacrifices your peace for their satisfaction. Provocation is often more about them than it is about you. People who poke and prod, who bait and belittle, are usually trying to stir something in you to feel control in themselves. And when you react, they win, not because you lost the argument, but because you gave them access to your power. Silence in the face of provocation isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's choosing not to dance with chaos. It's understanding that someone else's emotional storm doesn't have to become yours. That restraint is strength. We tell ourselves, if I don't respond, they'll think I'm soft. Or, if I let this go, they'll walk all over me. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strategy. It means preserving your dignity while the other person reveals their own mend. When you're provoked and you don't lash out, you're holding a boundary. You're refusing to match their energy. And more often than not, silence speaks louder than any comeback ever could. It says, I don't engage with disrespect. And that message lands. Follow the hands. I've had moments, so many, where I've felt cornered by someone's words, their tone, their passive aggression, or outright hostility. I've rehearsed responses in my head, ones that would slice through the tension with wit or anger. And I've also had moments where I said nothing. Not because I didn't have a response, but because I realized I didn't owe them one. And those were the moments where I reclaimed my power. Because sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Code. Not every invitation to conflict deserves your RSVP. The challenge is that when we're provoked, our nervous system kicks in. Our body goes into fight, flight, or freeze. And it's in those charged seconds that we either lean into reactivity or ground ourselves in self-awareness. That's why silence isn't just an external pause. It's an internal check-in. It's asking yourself, what's happening in me right now? What am I feeling underneath this trigger? And usually, underneath the heat, there's a deeper story: fear, shame, rejection. Fear, shame, rejection. When you can name that, you don't need to prove anything. You can just breathe. One of the most courageous things you can do is not let someone else's behavior rewrite your character. And that's exactly what happens when we respond to provocation with spite. We step out of alignment with who we are. We give them authorship over our narrative. But when we choose silence, not the silent treatment, not punishment, but mindful, grounded silence, we stay true. We remind ourselves that our emotional energy is ours to protect. That being drawn into someone else's drama is optional, not inevitable. So the next time someone tries to bait you, tries to pull you into their chaos, remember, silence isn't losing, it's leading. It's leading yourself back to your own values, your own breath, your own sense of worth. You don't have to prove anything to someone who's trying to provoke you. You don't need to show up at every fight you're invited to. Sometimes the most fearless thing you can do is stay quiet, stand tall, and let your peace speak for itself. Walk away if you need to. Cry if you must. But let the waves settle before you find your words. You are allowed to be emotional. You are allowed to feel it all deeply. So here's what I want to leave you with. Silence isn't weakness. It's not avoidance. And it's certainly not surrender. It's a conscious, courageous choice. Flow? In a world that rushes us to speak, pushes us to react, and tempts us to be louder just to be heard, choosing to pause, choosing stillness, is a radical act of strength. Ounce. When we stay silent in the moments that call for reflection, compassion, and emotional regulation, we create space for connection instead of conflict. We protect our peace. We preserve our relationships. And more than anything, we stay in alignment with our values, with our integrity, and with the kind of human we truly want to be. You don't have to prove your worth in every conversation. You don't have to fight. And you certainly don't need to sacrifice your dignity just to feel seen. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say nothing. And in that silence, you speak volumes.